I always thought the silence in my sister's house felt different, too heavy, too rehearsed, like it was hiding something. But that day, the day we gathered for her will, the silence turned into a voice of its own. It whispered, it screamed, it told me everything I was never supposed to know. The lawyer's office smelled of old paper and lemon polish. I sat there, wringing the corner of my black shawl, staring at the framed photograph of me and my sister on the desk. Martha had been gone barely 2 weeks, yet the world already felt colder. She was always the stronger one, sharp-tongued, practical, the kind of woman who never let anyone see her cry. We had fought many times, but never once did I imagine our final connection would be through a legal document. The lawyer, a thin man with trembling hands, cleared his throat. "Mrs. Eleanor Harper," he said softly, "your sister's final wishes are quite detailed. Please brace yourself." I nodded, my heart pounded. Around me sat a few distant relatives, Martha's old friends, my niece Claire, and the family doctor who looked out of place, his gaze darting nervously between us. Everyone had come expecting money, property, some token inheritance. I came for closure, for peace, for the faint, impossible hope that maybe, just maybe, Martha had left behind some clue about my son. 30 years ago, my only child, Daniel, disappeared. He was 17, gentle as spring, with his father's blue eyes and my stubborn jaw. One morning he left for school, and he never came home. The police searched for months. Posters, news reports, false leads. Nothing. It shattered me. And through all those years, the one person who never spoke much about it, who always changed the subject, was my sister Martha. She'd comfort me, yes, but with a distance, like she was standing behind a curtain. Now, as the will began to be read, that curtain was about to fall. Martha left most of her estate to charities, some to Claire, and a few minor gifts to old friends. When the lawyer reached my name, he paused. I could hear the faint ticking of the clock behind him. "For my dear sister Eleanor," he read slowly, "I leave the contents of the locked trunk in the attic of my home. The key is enclosed in this envelope." I frowned. A trunk? In her attic? I'd been in that house countless times, yet I had never seen one. My stomach twisted as he continued reading. "And, Eleanor, I am sorry." That was all. No explanation, no signature flourish, just those 3 words that hit me harder than any inheritance ever could. After the meeting, while everyone exchanged awkward condolences, I clutched the envelope and left without a word. The drive to Martha's old farmhouse felt endless. The November sky was grey and heavy, and I swear even the trees leaned in to listen. When I stepped inside her house, it smelled faintly of lavender and dust, the kind of scent that lingers after someone has gone for good. Climbed the creaking stairs to the attic, every step echoing with memory. Martha and I used to play up there as children, hiding from chores, reading by the window. Now, the same place felt haunted by the weight of her apology. The trunk sat in the corner beneath a sheet. It was old, dark mahogany, with a brass lock tarnished green by time. My hands trembled as I slid the key in. It clicked open easily, too easily, as if it had been waiting for me. Inside were stacks of letters bound by ribbon, a few photographs, and an envelope marked, "For Eleanor's eyes only." I tore it open. Her handwriting slanted as always, firm but rushed. "Eleanor, if you are reading this, I am gone, and I know what I've done can never be forgiven. I have carried your grief as my own, but I have also carried a truth that would destroy you. I am the reason Daniel never came home." The letter slipped from my hands. My knees gave out. The words swam before my eyes. I gasped for air, clawing at the edge of the trunk, trying to believe it was all some sick misunderstanding. She couldn't mean that. She couldn't. But the next line stole even that denial away. He came to me that night. He said he was scared of you finding out what he'd done. I told him I'd help. I thought I was protecting him, but I made it worse. I hid him. I pressed a hand to my mouth to stop a scream that clawed up my throat. The room spun. Memories began to crash together. Martha's constant visits back then, her vague excuses, her insistence that I move on. The late-night phone calls she would hang up without a word. The sudden trip she took right after Daniel vanished. Every moment I dismissed as coincidence suddenly made horrifying sense. I forced myself to keep reading. He stayed with me for a time. I swore I'd make things right, that I'd tell you when he was ready. But he never was. Something changed in him, Eleanor. He hated himself for what happened that night. What night? What had my son done? I searched the trunk again, desperate. There was another letter, this one older, the paper yellowed, addressed in Daniel's handwriting. Aunt Martha, please don't tell her, please. She'll never look at me the same again. Tears blurred the ink. My heart pounded like a drum. Every fibre of me wanted to deny it, to tear it all apart. But something inside whispered, "This is the truth you've begged for all these years." Then came the final envelope, heavier, sealed with wax. I broke it open. Inside were photographs, grainy, faded snapshots of a boy who looked like Daniel but older, hiding behind dark glasses and a cap. The back of each photo had a place and date written by Martha. The last one said, Birmingham, 1998. That was 10 years after he went missing. He was alive. He had been alive all along. A sob tore through me, raw and loud. My sister, my own blood, had kept my son hidden. She'd stolen my motherhood, my years of mourning, my sanity. And now she was gone, leaving only guilt behind for me to find. The wind howled against the window. I fell to the floor, clutching those letters to my chest, feeling both love and rage battle inside me. All those years I'd prayed for a miracle, but God, I never asked for one this cruel. Somewhere, in that house full of shadows, I could almost hear her voice, steady, regretful, whispering from the walls. I thought I was saving him, Eleanor, but I only damned us all. And for the first time in decades, I realized the mystery of my missing son wasn't over. It had just begun. The night after reading Martha's letter, I didn't sleep. I sat in her living room, surrounded by her memories. The piano she never let me touch, the framed wedding picture that always made her smile in that self-satisfied way. And now, the unopened boxes of a life she had lived, beside me, but apart from me. The truth pressed on my chest like a weight I couldn't breathe under. My son had been alive, hidden by my own sister. At dawn, I made tea just to feel the warmth in my hands. The sun tried to seep through the thin curtains, but it felt like light didn't belong in that house anymore. I picked up the letters again, the ones in Daniel's handwriting. The ink had faded in places, but the pain in his words hadn't. Aunt Martha, she'll never understand. She'll hate me if she knows. You said you'd help me. Please don't let her find me. I can't face her after what happened. I read it over and over, searching for hidden meaning. What could he have done? He was a kind boy, gentle, quiet. He'd volunteer at church, bring me daisies from the garden. He wasn't capable of anything terrible. But the words, after what happened, echoed like a riddle I'd never solved. I gathered every piece of paper, every photograph, and laid them out on the dining table. There were receipts from places I'd never known Martha visited, motels, small towns, train tickets, all around the years after Daniel vanished. The most recent one was dated 2005. My heart skipped a beat. Martha died in 2007. That meant she had seen him. Just 2 years before she passed. I wanted to scream, to break every plate in that kitchen. How could she look me in the eyes year after year as I searched graveyards and morgues, lighting candles for a son she knew was breathing? By afternoon, I decided I couldn't sit in that house any longer. I needed to find answers. I needed to know what she'd done, and why. I drove to the address written on the back of the last photograph. Birmingham, 1998. It wasn't much of a lead, but it was all I had. The road stretched ahead like a long, empty scar. Every mile felt like another piece of my life peeling away. The city hadn't changed much. Grey skies, crowded streets, indifferent faces. I started with the motel listed in one of the receipts. The clerk was an elderly man who looked like he'd been sitting behind that counter since the place was built. I showed him the faded photo. "Do you remember this boy?" I asked, my voice trembling. "He might have stayed here years ago. His name's Daniel Harper." He squinted at the picture, then shook his head. "Too long ago, love. Can't say I do. But..." He frowned and leaned forward. "I remember a woman. Looked like you. Came here often, paid in cash. Said she was visiting family. Could have been your sister, maybe." My throat went dry. "She stayed here?" He nodded. "Several times. Last I saw her, she was with a young man. Wore a cap, kept his head down. Quiet sort." It was like being stabbed in the same wound over and over. I thanked him, forced a smile, and walked out before the tears could fall. I sat in my car, staring at nothing, hearing my own heartbeat echo. So it was true. Martha hadn't just written those words out of guilt. She'd lived a double life, protecting my son, lying to me every step of the way. But from what? That night I stayed in a cheap motel nearby. Sleep came in fragments. I dreamt of Daniel's face, half hidden in shadow, half turned away, and of Martha whispering, "You wouldn't have forgiven him, Ellie. You wouldn't have forgiven me." The next morning, I decided to visit someone I hadn't seen in decades, Dr. Walsh, our old family doctor. He had been at the will reading, silent and uneasy. Something about his face that day had bothered me. I drove to his clinic, my heart racing. He looked shocked when I walked in. "Eleanor, you shouldn't be here." "I need answers, doctor." I set the letters on his desk. "You knew. You've known something all these years, haven't you?" He looked at the papers, pale as ash. I was sworn to secrecy. Your sister made me promise." "Promise what?" My voice cracked. "That you'd let me believe my son was dead." He sighed and sank into his chair, rubbing his temples. "Martha brought Daniel to me once. He was injured, nothing fatal, but he was terrified. She told me it was an accident, that he couldn't go home yet. She said you'd never forgive him if you knew the truth." My heart pounded. "What truth?" He hesitated, then said quietly, "There was a girl, from the neighborhood, younger. Something happened that night. The police were about to question him, and Martha hid him before they could." I froze. "A girl?" He nodded. "She was found injured near the old quarry. Everyone assumed it was a stranger. They never proved anything. But Daniel, he was there that night. He confessed to Martha, said it wasn't what it looked like, but she panicked. She took him away." My head spun. The world felt like it was tilting. My sweet, kind boy, caught in something so dark that my sister sacrificed both their lives to keep it hidden. I stood there, trembling. "Where is he now?" Dr. Walsh looked at me sadly. "I don't know. Martha stopped coming after 2005. I assumed he'd moved on, or..." He didn't finish. I left, without saying another word. The cold air outside hit me like a slap. My heart screamed for answers, but the road ahead was fogged with guilt, anger, and confusion. That night, back in Martha's house, I opened the trunk again. Buried beneath the letters was a small box. Inside was a locket, the one I'd given Daniel on his 16th birthday, with a tiny photograph of me inside. And tucked behind it, a note in his handwriting. "Mom, if you ever find this, I'm sorry. Aunt Martha did what she had to. Please forgive her. Don't look for me. I don't deserve to be found." My tears fell onto the paper. I pressed it to my lips and whispered into the dark, "You deserve to be loved, my boy, even if the world didn't." And for the first time in 30 years, I realized my search wasn't over because he didn't want to be found. But I had to find him anyway. Not for justice, not for closure, but for the truth my sister took to her grave. I turned off the light, clutching that letter to my heart. Somewhere out there, my son was still hiding from me, and from what he'd done, and I would find him, no matter what it cost me. I didn't leave the trunk alone after that. Grief has a way of making you timid. Rage makes you brave. I took every letter back out and spread them on the attic floor, like a map of roads I should have travelled years ago. The boards were cold under my knees, dust drifting in the light like tiny ghosts. I ran my fingers along the inside rim of the trunk, feeling for anything I might have missed. My nail caught on a rough edge beneath the lid. I pressed. A thin strip of wood gave, and a narrow compartment clicked open with a tired sigh. There was a second key inside on a red ribbon, and a folded card with Martha's tight handwriting. "If courage fails you, leave this be. If it doesn't, Unit 14B, Welton Storage." She'd known I would look. She'd known I would keep looking, even if it killed me. I left the house at once. The sky had turned to slate, the afternoon sagging under a low, bruised light. Welton Storage sat on the edge of town like a row of sleeping mouths. The woman at the desk barely looked up when I gave her the key and the unit number, just slid a clipboard toward me with chipped purple nails. The metal door shuddered when I rolled it up. Inside, the cold smelled like oil and old cardboard. The unit wasn't large, just a handful of boxes neatly labelled in Martha's precise block letters. Clothes, kitchen, books, and one that read, "Files, D." The last one pulled me across the concrete as if it had a pulse. I knelt on the floor and opened it. Inside were manila folders tied with twine, a small tape recorder, and a cloth pouch that clinked like coins when I lifted it. There were receipts again, more motels, train tickets, bills from clinics with names that sounded religious and discreet. St. Gertrude's Convalescent, Good Shepherd House, St. Bartholomew Refuge. Each had a date scrawled: 1990, 1996, 2001, 2005. The years I'd lit candles and begged God for a sign, my sister had been making appointments and wire transfers. I picked up the tape recorder. The plastic was smooth with age, the buttons dulled to grey. A single cassette rested beside it in a cracked case labelled, "For me only, if I'm gone." The "me" was underlined. It wasn't for Daniel. It was for Martha. Or for me? My hands shook. I pressed play. Static hissed like breath. Then her voice, closer than death, close enough to look over my shoulder. "Eleanor," she said, "if you're listening, I failed to be brave in life, so I'll be brave in death. I told myself I was protecting him. Some nights I wonder if I was only protecting myself." I gripped the recorder, leaning forward as though I could crawl into it. "He came to me the night at the quarry. He was shaking. He couldn't finish a sentence. He said there was screaming. Something happened, he'd been there, he'd run. He kept saying, 'I didn't mean, I didn't mean.'" Her breath hitched on the tape, a sound I had never heard come from my impenetrable sister. "I found the car first," she whispered. "The blue Ford. I remember the dent like a bruise on a cheek. I shouldn't put this on a tape. But if I take it to my grave, I will go mad underneath the flowers. There was mud on the bumper. There were bits of glass. I don't know whose fault it was, Elle. I only know I drove to him. I told him we could make it right. And then I told him the only way to make it right was to disappear. I stopped the tape. The storage unit swam. The blue Ford. Her blue Ford. The dent I'd noticed in passing 3 decades ago when she said a shopping trolley had rolled into her in the grocery lot. The lie slipped into an ordinary afternoon like a needle slipped into a loaf of bread. I pressed play again. I let him believe, she said, that if he came home, the police would destroy him. I said you wouldn't be able to look at him. I said 1,000 things I hate myself for. But I was there too, Elle. I was there at the quarry before the police. I did something you will never forgive. I made a call. I paid someone to keep the girl's family quiet. I patched a world together with money and fear and told myself I'd saved our boy. I told myself a good lie until it sounded like a prayer. The tape clicked off. The ribbon had reached its end. The recorder whirred emptily for a breath and went still. I sat with it in my lap as if it were a warm thing that might die if I moved. Our boy. She'd said it without thinking. Years fell away and I saw the two of us, young and foolish, our whole future small enough to hold on a porch step, promising to protect each other from everything. How far that promise had stretched, until love snapped into something vicious. I rifled deeper into the box. The cloth pouch rattled with coin, but something heavier sat at the bottom, a metal ring of keys and a thick envelope stamped records. Inside were photocopies of documents, a bus pass with a photograph I could have picked out from a million, my son's eyes under a cap, the name David Markham printed in blocky anonymous letters. There was a social security card in the same name, a worn library card from a town on the coast I had never been to, and then a photocopied intake form from Good Shepherd House, listing a patient brought in by a B. Bennett. Next to it, a business card. Father Bernard Bennett, St. Christopher Parish. A phone number. A town. Greywick. I put everything back carefully and locked the unit again. The sky had gone from slate to iron. Rain started while I drove, a cold, spiteful sheet that turned the world into watercolour. I pulled over under an elm and called the number on the card before I could talk myself out of it. A kind, creased voice answered on the third ring. St. Christopher's. Father Bennett? I was breathless. My name is Eleanor Harper. I'm calling about a young man you once helped. He would have used the name David Markham. He's my son. There was the small sound of a chair being pulled in, the soft pause of someone searching memory. Mrs. Harper, the priest said, and my name in his mouth felt like a blessing and a warning. I wondered how long it would take for the past to ask me to answer. Please, I said, clutching the phone so hard my fingers ached. Was he safe? Is he alive? He was a good man in a bad season, he said gently. He carried a weight he thought would crush you if you knew it. Your sister asked me to keep him near God and far from danger. I tried to do both. He worked at the docks for a while, then at a hospice on the cliff road. People loved him because he loved quietly. But he never stopped looking over his shoulder. Where is he now? The question fell out of me like a stone through water. I cannot be sure, he said after a long breath. He left Greywick in 2005. He said he had one last thing to do. He left me a package to give to you if you ever called, and strict instructions only to hand it to you and no one else. There was a rustle of papers, the sound of a memory pulled off a shelf. Come if you can, before I lose what little time I have. The hospice on the cliff road, a life spent close to endings. My boy living among the dying as if he had appointed himself to carry their last words because he couldn't bear his own. I drove home with the rain needling at the windows like 1,000 questions. Martha's house rose out of the wet dark, patient as ever. I went back to the attic because some cruel part of me wanted to ask the empty trunk what else it had been swallowing while I wept in church pews. I emptied the box labelled books and found at the bottom a battered leather journal I recognised instantly. It had been mine once, the one I used when Daniel was small to write down his firsts. First tooth, first bruise, first rain. Martha had taken it. Why? I opened to the middle and found newer pages in her handwriting glued over mine. "If Claire ever learns," the first line began, and my heart lurched so hard I thought the floor would tilt. I read with my breath held like a child listening for footsteps in the hall. "If Claire ever learns, she will hate me. She will hate me for saving her and for stealing her. But what else could I have done? He brought her to me wrapped in a hospital blanket, shaking so hard I thought he'd break. He said he couldn't give a child this shame. He said, 'You must never know.' I said I would fix it the way I fix everything. I signed papers nobody read. I put my name where another woman's should have gone. I told the world she was mine." The attic blurred. The word she pulsed on the page like a wound that wouldn't close. I saw Claire at the will reading, her careful blue dress, the way she didn't meet my eyes when my name was called. I felt my mouth go dry. There was a photograph tucked into the inside cover, the paper so thin it had stuck. I peeled it free with careful fingers. Martha stood in a hospital room, her hair pulled back, fatigue etched across her mouth. In her arms, a newborn with a knitted hat and a furious, beautiful face. In the bottom corner, a date, June 1988. On the back, just one line in Daniel's handwriting that punched the air from my lungs. "For Ellie, when it's safe." For Ellie, not for Aunt Martha, for me. I slid down the wall, the journal open in my lap, the photograph trembling in my hand like a living thing. A newborn in 1988. Daniel disappeared in 1987. Claire had been born. Martha had said the same year, swearing off men and miracles while the whole town murmured about late motherhood. I had celebrated that baby with casseroles and a hand-knitted sweater, and never once asked the question that was screaming at me now. The attic seemed to tilt toward the truth. My missing son had given my sister a child, and my sister had given that child her name. The photograph kept sliding from my fingers as if it didn't want to stay in this world. My pulse hammered in my ears. The air in the attic turned thick, heavy, almost alive. Claire, my niece, my sister's daughter, the one who had sat beside me at the will reading in her pale blue dress, was my granddaughter, my Daniel's child. The revelation pressed on me until I thought my bones would crack. Memories flooded back, 1,000 small moments that had never meant anything until now. The way Martha's eyes had softened whenever Claire laughed. The way she'd insisted that Claire call me Aunt Ellie instead of Grandma, always brushing it off with, "We're too close in spirit for that kind of formality." Now I understood the edge of fear beneath her smile whenever I'd taken Claire's hand. I stumbled down the stairs clutching the photograph. My breath came ragged, my mind splintered. The clock in the hallway ticked loud enough to drown the world. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Martha and I had once shelled peas on long summer nights, and I laid the photograph beside the letter and the locket. They looked like strangers to one another. A mother, a son, and a baby. And yet they were all my blood. I thought of Claire's face at the funeral, how she'd cried, but not the way daughters cry. Her tears had been too measured, too uncertain. Did she know? Did she suspect anything at all? A sharp knock shattered the stillness. I opened the door to find Claire herself standing there, damp from the drizzle, her eyes red as if she'd been crying for hours. "Aunt Ellie," she said, her voice trembling, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the will. I had this feeling you found something. Something about Dad." My throat tightened around the word. Dad. She had never spoken of him before, never asked, never even hinted that she wondered who he was. Now her voice carried both fear and hope. Come inside, I managed. She stepped in, dripping rain on the rug, and her eyes went straight to the photograph on the table. Her breath caught. That's me, she whispered. That's me as a baby. Why do you have that? I felt the ground tilt. Claire, I said softly, there's something you need to know, and I wish to God I didn't have to be the one to tell you. She sat down slowly, her face pale, her hands clutching her knees. Is this about Mom? About what she did? I nodded, unable to look at her. Your mother was protecting someone, hiding someone, and that someone was your father, my son. For a long moment she didn't breathe. Then she laughed, a small, broken sound that didn't belong to her. That's impossible, she said, shaking her head. You mean Daniel Harper, the boy who went missing? Mum used to talk about him sometimes. She said he was your son, that he ran away. You're telling me? I'm telling you he was your father. The silence that followed was unbearable. She looked at me as if I had slapped her. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. That means, her voice cracked, that means Mom lied to everyone. Lied to me. She thought she was saving you, I whispered. Saving him. She believed he'd done something terrible, something that would have ruined both of you. Claire stood up suddenly, pacing the kitchen. What did he do? What did she do? I hesitated. The truth was poison, but it was all I had left to give. There was a girl. Something happened the night he disappeared. Your mother helped him run. Later, he brought you to her. He couldn't bear for me to know. Claire sank into the chair again, her hands trembling. She used to tell me, you were a gift, Claire, a second chance at love. I thought it was just her being sentimental. She wasn't lying, I said. She just never told you whose second chance you were. Claire covered her face, and for the first time I saw my son's expression in her, that same mixture of guilt and gentleness that had lived in his eyes. After a while she looked up, tears streaking her cheeks. Is he alive? I don't know, I said, but I know where he was. He lived in a town called Greywick. A priest there, Father Bennett, helped him. I spoke to him today. He said Daniel left something for me. For us. She took a shaky breath. Then we have to go. Tonight. The determination in her voice startled me. She had Martha's strength and Daniel's quiet fire, a dangerous, beautiful mix. I nodded. We'll go at first light. That night we didn't sleep. We sat by the fire reading the letters together. Claire wept openly when she saw her father's handwriting. He sounds kind, she whispered. Lost, but kind. He was, I said, my voice thick. He loved deeper than was good for him. When dawn bled into the windows, we packed what little we needed and drove. The road to Greywick cut through endless fields that glistened under morning mist. Neither of us spoke much. The silence between us was sacred, heavy with everything we couldn't yet say. Greywick was a small coastal town, perched on cliffs that dropped into a grey sea. The wind smelled of salt and decay. St. Christopher's Church stood at the end of a narrow lane, its bell tower leaning like an old man. Father Bennett met us at the door, frail but bright-eyed, a wool shawl around his shoulders. Mrs. Harper, he said gently, and this must be Claire. She blinked in surprise. You knew my name? He smiled sadly. He spoke of you often. He called you his morning light. My knees went weak. He was here then. The priest nodded. For many years, he helped with the hospice, never asked for money, only peace. Where did he go? Claire asked, her voice small. Father Bennet sighed. He left one morning before the sun rose, said he had to make something right. He left this for you. He disappeared into a back room and returned with a small wooden box. It was old, carved with a pattern of ivy leaves. He handed it to me with trembling hands. He told me if you ever came, I should tell you that love can rot if buried too long, and that forgiveness grows best in the open. I opened the box slowly. Inside was a letter and a small sea-glass pendant. I recognized it immediately. Daniel had made it for me when he was 12. The letter was written in his careful script. Mom, if you're reading this, I hope you've forgiven me for leaving. I didn't hurt that girl, but I ran because I believed I had. Everyone did. Aunt Martha made me disappear to save me, and I let her. I lived in shadows for too long, and when Claire was born, I saw a chance to give something good back to the world. But I couldn't stay. I couldn't poison her life with my shame. Tell her I loved her. Tell her I never stopped wishing I could come home. The words bled into each other through my tears. Claire leaned over my shoulder, whispering, "He loved me." Father Bennet placed a gentle hand on her back. He did more than that. He saved lives here. He helped the dying find peace. He prayed for you both every night. Do you know where he went? I asked through tears. The priest looked toward the sea. A fisherman found a coat washed up on the rocks a few weeks after he left. Inside was a photograph, you and him when he was a boy. We never found a body. Some say he drowned. I like to think he finally forgave himself and went somewhere no one knew his name. Claire pressed her face into my shoulder. I wrapped my arms around her, feeling the years between us collapse. The ocean outside roared, and for the first time in 30 years, the sound didn't feel cruel. That night, as we stayed in the small inn by the shore, I took the sea-glass pendant from the box and placed it around Claire's neck. He wanted you to have this, I said. She smiled through her tears. Then he's still here. And for the first time, I believed her. The wind howled outside the inn like a restless soul. I couldn't sleep. The sound of the waves crashing against the cliffs felt too much like memories breaking. Claire was asleep beside me, her head buried beneath the blanket, the sea-glass pendant glowing faintly in the dim light. I sat by the window, staring at the horizon. I had my son's last words, but not his peace. Something still felt unfinished, like a door left ajar in the dark. Martha's confession had painted half a picture. Daniel's letter filled in some of the colour. But there was still that night, the girl at the quarry, the wound that began it all. If my son hadn't done what people believed he did, then who had? I went to the church early, long before the morning bells. Father Bennet was already there, arranging candles. He looked at me as though he had been expecting me. You couldn't rest, he said quietly. No, I whispered. You said Daniel helped the dying find peace. But what about his own? What really happened the night he disappeared? The priest sighed. He never told me everything, but there was someone else, someone who came here years later asking the same questions. A woman named Lydia Ward. She was the girl from the quarry. I froze. She's alive? He nodded. Very much so. She moved here after her husband passed. Lives on the far side of the cliffs, near the old lighthouse. I think she's been waiting for you. My heart began to hammer. All those years of believing the worst, all those sleepless nights blaming my son, and the one person who could tell me the truth was still breathing. By the time Claire woke, I had packed our bags. The road to the cliffs wound through fog and wild grass, the sea roaring below like a warning. The lighthouse stood crooked and grey, its light long, dead. In a small cottage beside it, a woman stood by the gate, her hair white, her eyes tired but kind. She seemed to know me instantly. "You're Daniel's mother," she said, her voice trembling. "I wondered when you'd come." I nodded, unable to speak. Claire hovered behind me, clutching her pendant. Lydia motioned us inside. The cottage smelled of salt and lemon polish, like the sea and sorrow had learned to coexist. She poured tea, but neither of us drank. "I thought he killed you," I blurted out. "That night, everyone did. Even he believed it." Lydia shook her head slowly. "No, he didn't hurt me. He saved me." The world tilted. I stared at her, unable to process the words. She continued softly. "That night I ran from home. My father was drunk, angry. Daniel saw me crying near the quarry. He offered to drive me away. We argued. He wanted to take me to the police. I wanted to disappear. We crashed. I hit my head, blacked out. When I woke, he was gone. He thought I'd died." Claire gasped, covering her mouth. "I tried to tell people," Lydia said, her eyes glistening. "But your sister, Martha, came to me. She said Daniel was in trouble, that he believed he'd killed me. She begged me to stay silent, said she'd protect him if I did. She paid my medical bills, sent me away to my aunt's house for a year. By the time I returned, the whole town had written him off as missing. I thought it was what she wanted." I pressed my shaking hands together. "She wanted to protect him, but she destroyed us all instead." Lydia looked at me with sympathy. "She carried guilt for years. She wrote to me once, just before she died, said she was leaving the truth in her will, hoping you'd finally find peace." I leaned forward, whispering, "Did she ever tell you about the baby?" Lydia hesitated, then shook her head. "No, I didn't know." I looked at Claire, who sat pale and silent, her eyes wide with shock. "You were his child," I said gently, "his last gift." Lydia reached across the table and took Claire's hand. Then part of him did come back. The three of us sat there for a long time, bound by a grief too old to cry over. When we finally stepped outside, the sun had broken through the clouds. The sea glittered like glass, calm for the first time since we'd arrived. "Your father wasn't running from guilt," Lydia said, her voice firm. "He was running from shame. He thought his mistake had cost a life, when it had actually saved one." I closed my eyes. For 30 years I had hated myself for letting him walk out that door. Now I realized he had carried a burden no one deserved. We said goodbye to Lydia and drove back toward town. Claire was quiet until halfway down the hill. "He saved her," she whispered, "and Grandma hid it. She made him believe he was a monster when he was a hero." I reached over and squeezed her hand. "Your grandmother thought she was protecting him. But sometimes love turns cruel when it tries too hard to shield." She looked at me, tears in her eyes. "Do you think he's really gone?" I didn't answer. The ocean stretched endlessly beside us, grey and alive. Somewhere out there, I felt him. Not gone, just beyond reach. When we returned to the church, Father Bennett met us at the gate. "You found her," he said, as though he already knew. "She told us everything," I said softly. "Daniel didn't kill her. Martha made sure he never learned the truth." The priest smiled faintly, relief softening his face. "Then he's at peace now. Maybe that's all he ever wanted, for you to know." Claire handed him the sea glass pendant. "Will you keep this here, somewhere safe?" He shook his head gently. "No, child, it's yours now. Your father's story doesn't belong to the church. It belongs to his family." She slipped it back around her neck, her fingers brushing the glass as if it were warm. That evening, before leaving Greywick, we walked to the cliffs one last time. The wind was gentler now, the tide low. I took Daniel's letter and tore it in half. One part I buried in the sand, the other I threw into the sea. "For all the years we lost," I whispered. "For all the love that still remains." Claire placed a small bouquet of wildflowers beside me. "Do you think he can hear us?" I smiled faintly. Mothers always hear their children, no matter how far. We stood there until the sun sank, painting the sky in shades of fire and rose. For the first time, I didn't feel haunted. I felt hollow, yes, but hollow like a shell that had finally released the echo it carried. When we got into the car, Claire looked back at the ocean and said, "You know, Mum wasn't all bad, was she?" "No," I said softly. "She just loved the wrong way. She tried to fix what was never broken, and she kept secrets thinking they'd keep us safe. But secrets don't protect, they rot." She nodded, staring at the horizon. "Then let's not keep any." I started the engine, the headlights cutting through the twilight. The road wound back toward home, toward a life that was finally free of ghosts. For the first time in 30 years, I felt the weight in my chest loosen. The truth had broken me, but it had also freed me. And somewhere out beyond the waves, I imagined Daniel smiling. The drive home felt different this time. The air didn't cling to my skin the way it used to. For 30 years, the world had looked duller to me, as though I'd been walking beneath a veil of grey. But as the miles rolled by and the ocean faded behind us, I realized the veil had finally lifted. Claire sat quietly beside me, watching the landscape change from salt-stained cliffs to golden fields. Her fingers never left the sea glass pendant around her neck. We didn't speak much until the road turned toward Martha's old farmhouse, the place where this nightmare had begun, and perhaps where it would finally end. When I parked, the house stood silent, waiting, the same as it always had. Yet it no longer felt like a tomb. It felt like a witness. Claire followed me inside. The faint scent of lavender still lingered, though fainter now, like a ghost losing its hold. I lit the fireplace, the crackle filling the emptiness. We sat in front of it, not as aunt and niece, but as something much deeper, two survivors bound by truth. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't painful anymore. It was healing. Finally, Claire said softly, "What will we do now? With all this, everything we know?" I looked at her. "We'll tell the truth," I said. "All of it. No more secrets. No more pretending." She nodded. "People will talk." "Let them," I replied. "They talked when he disappeared. They talked when your mother had you. Let them talk now, for the right reason." I rose and went to Martha's study. The old oak desk was covered in dust. I began pulling out drawers one by one until I found a small envelope hidden beneath the lining. My name was written across it in my sister's hand. My heart skipped. I opened it slowly. Inside was a final letter, short, trembling, written in the shaky pen of a dying woman. "Eleanor, if you've come this far, then you've already learned what I did. I know you must hate me. You have every right. But I want you to know, everything I did was out of love, even when that love turned monstrous. I couldn't bear to see you lose your son, so I chose to lose him for you. I thought I could control fate, but I only made it crueler. When you find Claire, tell her I'm sorry. Tell her her mother loved her beyond reason. Tell her I kept her secret not to punish her father, but to protect her from the world's judgment. Forgive me if you can. I wanted to save our family. I only managed to break it." Tears rolled down my cheeks. I handed the letter to Claire. She read it slowly, her lips trembling. "She wasn't evil," she whispered. "She was scared." "She was both," I said quietly. "Sometimes love and fear look the same when they're desperate." We spent the night going through every box, every trunk, carefully sorting Martha's life into truth and lies. We found letters she'd never sent, apologies, half-written confessions, even notes addressed to Daniel that she must have been too afraid to mail. It was as if she had tried to write her way into forgiveness, but died before she could send the words out into the world. By morning, the house felt lighter. Dust still clung to the windowsills, but the air didn't taste bitter anymore. Claire brewed coffee while I sat at the table where I'd once cried over Martha's first letter. Now, I held a different envelope, one that Father Bennett had slipped into my pocket when we said goodbye. I hadn't opened it yet. My hands trembled as I tore the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded neatly with my son's handwriting. "Mom, if Father Bennett ever gives you this, it means I couldn't say goodbye in person. Don't be angry. I never meant to leave again. But sometimes forgiveness takes a road we don't understand. I wanted to tell you that the night at the quarry didn't ruin me. It revealed who I was. I ran not because of what I'd done, but because I couldn't face how much you loved me despite it. I lived a quiet life, and I found peace in helping others find theirs. If I never come back, don't think of me as gone. I am the wind in Claire's hair, the tide against the rocks, the small kindness between strangers. That's where I live now. I love you. Thank you for never giving up on me." I pressed the letter to my chest. Claire came over, kneeling beside me. We cried together, softly, without shame, letting the years of silence finally break apart. After a while, Claire whispered, "Do you think he forgave Grandma?" I smiled through my tears. I think he forgave her before she ever asked. He understood her, even when I couldn't. We decided to stay in the farmhouse for a while. It no longer felt haunted. It felt like home again. I spent my days tending to the garden Martha had once loved, planting new lilies where weeds had overtaken the soil. Claire painted the shutters blue, saying the house needed more sky. Sometimes, when the wind blew just right, the chimes Martha hung decades ago would tinkle faintly, like laughter carried from somewhere we couldn't see. One afternoon, as I was pruning the roses, Claire came running out with a small wooden box she'd found hidden behind a loose brick in the fireplace. Inside was a faded photograph of Martha and Daniel on the porch steps, smiling, arms around each other. Behind it, a scrap of paper in Martha's writing. "For when she finally knows. So she remembers we were happy once." I smiled through fresh tears. For the first time, I didn't feel anger when I thought of my sister, only sorrow and gratitude. She had sinned terribly, but she had loved ferociously. We both had. That evening, Claire and I sat on the porch as the sun dipped low. The air smelled of earth and blooming lilacs. "Do you think he's really gone, Aunt Ellie?" she asked softly. I looked toward the horizon, where the light melted into the sea. "No. Some people don't die, Claire. They just turn into the stories we tell so they can stay alive in the telling." She leaned her head against my shoulder. "Then promise we'll keep telling it." "I promise," I said, "but not as a tragedy, as a story about forgiveness." The stars came out one by one, slow and deliberate. I could almost hear Daniel's laughter in the wind, faint but familiar, carried through the trees like a blessing. For the first time since he vanished, I wasn't searching for him. I'd already found him, in her, in me, in every truth we'd finally uncovered. The pain hadn't vanished, had just learned how to breathe. And as the night deepened, I realized that love doesn't end when people die or disappear. It lingers, reshapes itself, becomes the air that holds us up when everything else has fallen apart. That's what my sister never understood. That's what my son died knowing. And that's what my granddaughter, his child, will carry forward. The next morning, I buried the last of Martha's letters beneath the old oak in the yard. I whispered a prayer, not for redemption, but for peace, for all of us. Then I looked toward the rising sun and felt something I hadn't in decades. Freedom. The story of my sister's betrayal, my son's disappearance, and the child who bound us all together had finally come full circle. It wasn't a happy ending, but it was an honest one. And sometimes, honesty is the only kind of peace a heart like mine ever truly needs.